Hey guys, today we are going to be continuing the story of Joseph. Now let's see, where were we? Right, there's a huge famine in all the land, and everyone is going to Egypt to buy food from Joseph. And Joseph's father is now sending his brothers to go and buy food for them in Egypt. Let's see what happens next. Now Joseph was the governor of all the land and sold grain to all the people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived in Egypt, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground, and as soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. But he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them, saying, "Where do you come from?" "From the land of Canaan," they replied. "We're here to buy food." Remembering his dreams about them, Joseph accused them of being spies, but they said, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are the sons of one man. We're honest men, not spies." But Joseph said, "No, you have come to see where our land is unprotected." Again they replied, "No, we are 12 sons, the sons of one man who lives in Canaan. The youngest is with our father, and one is no more." But Joseph said, "No, you are spies, and this is how I will test you. You will not leave until your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you to go get him, and the rest of you will be kept here in prison so that I can test and see if you're telling the truth. If you do not, then surely you are spies." So he took them all in custody for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Joseph repeated his demand, this time saying that just one of them needed to stay and the rest could go home and bring food to their families and come back with their brother. And his brothers said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of what we did to our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded for his life, but we didn't listen. And now this distress has fallen on us." Reuben said, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen, and now we must make up for his blood." At this time, they didn't realize that Joseph could understand what they were saying, because he was using an interpreter. Hearing this, Joseph turned away from them and began to weep. But then he came back and had Simeon, the oldest, tied and bound before their eyes. He gave orders to have each of their bags filled with grain, and also their payment of silver placed back in their sacks. And he gave them provisions for their journey, and they loaded up their donkeys and their grain and headed back to Canaan. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened their sacks to feed their donkey, and upon opening it, he found his silver in the top of his sack. "My silver has been returned," he exclaimed. "Here, it's in my sack." Their hearts sank, and they turned to each other trembling and said, "What is this that God has done to us?" When they came back to their father in Canaan, they told him everything that happened to them. And as they were emptying their sacks, they found that each man's silver was still in their sack. When they and their father saw this, they were frightened. Their father Jacob said to them, "You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and now Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin from me. Everything is against me." And despite much pleading, Jacob refused to send Benjamin with them. Time passed, and the famine was still severe in the land. And after they had eaten all the food that they had brought back from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go back and buy us a little bit more food to eat." But Judah said, "The man warned us, saying, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. So if you send Benjamin with us, we will go. But if you don't, we cannot.'" After much pleading, and Judah even promising to be held personally responsible if anything happened to Benjamin, Jacob finally relented. And he told them to take some of the best products of the land with them as gifts, as well as a double amount of the payment. So sending Benjamin with them, he said, "May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, I am heartbroken." So the brothers began their journey back to Egypt. And when they arrived, and Joseph saw that Benjamin was with them, he told the steward of his house to take the men to his house and prepare a meal for them, for he would eat with them at noon. So the steward took the men to Joseph's house, and they were terrified. They thought, "It must be because our silver was placed back in our sacks that he's taking us to his house. He wants to attack us and take our possessions and make us slaves." So they decided to go to Joseph's steward and explain the situation, saying that they had found their silver in their sacks on the way home last time, but now they had brought it back with some. And the steward said, "It's all right. Don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you the treasure in your sacks." Then they washed up, fed their donkeys, and prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon. When Joseph arrived, they presented their gifts to him and bowed down before him on the ground. He asked them how they were doing and how their father was. "Your servant, our father, is still alive and well," they replied. As he looked around and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? God be gracious to you, my son." Deeply moved at the sight of his own brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to cry, and he went into his private room and wept. After he had gotten control of himself and washed his face, he came back out and said, "Serve the food." Then the brothers were seated, and to their amazement were sat in birth order from the oldest to the youngest. And when the food was served from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portions were 5 times as much as anyone else's. So they feasted and drank freely with him. After this, Joseph gave his steward these instructions. He said, "Fill the men's sacks with as much grain as they can carry, and put each man's silver back in their sack as well." And he said, "Put my cup, the silver one, in the youngest son's sack, along with his silver for his grain." So the steward did as Joseph said. Early the next morning, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. And when they had gone only a short distance, Joseph said to his steward, "Go after those men at once, and when you meet them, say, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you have done.'" So when the steward had caught up with them, he repeated these words. Then they said to him, "Why do you say such things? We would never do anything like that. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found in our sacks the last time. Why would we steal silver or gold from our master's house? If any of us are found to be with it, may that person die, and the rest of us will become your slaves." "Very well, let it be as you say," said the steward. "Whoever is found with it will become my slaves, and the rest of you will go free." So each of them quickly lowered their sacks and opened them, and the steward began searching them, starting with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And when he got to Benjamin's sack, there it was. Upon this discovery, the brothers began tearing their clothes in anguish. Then they all loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. When they returned, Joseph was still at his house, and they threw themselves down at his feet. And Joseph said to them, "What is this you have done? Don't you know that I can find things out by divination?" Judah replied, "What can we say, my lord? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered our guilt, and now we are all your slaves." But Joseph said, "No, only the man found with the cup will be my slave. The rest of you can go back to your father in peace." Then Judah went up to him and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak a word. Don't be angry with me, though you are an equal to Pharaoh himself. You asked us if we had a father or a brother, and we told you that we had an aged father, and a young son was born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and he's the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him dearly. Then you said, 'Bring him down to me so I can see him myself.' But we said, 'The boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves him, our father will die.' But you insisted that we bring him, otherwise we would not see your face again. So we went back and told our father what you said. Later our father said, 'Go and bring back a little bit more food for us.' But we said, 'We can't unless our youngest brother goes with us.' Our father said, 'You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me and has surely been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery. So, sir, if the boy is not with us when we go back to our father, he will surely die. I personally guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. How can I go back if he's not with me? Don't you see what this will do to my father?' Then Joseph could control himself no longer before his attendants, and he cried out, 'Have everyone leave my presence!' So there remained just Joseph and his brothers. And he wept loudly and said, 'I am Joseph. Is my father still living?' But his brothers couldn't answer him because they were terrified in his presence. Joseph said to his brothers, 'Come close to me.' When they came close, he said, 'I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now don't be distressed or be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For the past 2 years there have been a famine, and it will continue for 5 more years. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So really, it wasn't you who sent me here, but God. He has made me ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry back to my father and tell him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me and don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you and all your children and grandchildren. I will provide for you so that you will survive the rest of the famine.' Then Joseph threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him weeping, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them, and they talked together. Then they returned home to their father and told him, 'Joseph is still alive. In fact, he's ruler of Egypt.' Jacob was stunned and didn't believe them. But when they told him everything that Joseph said to them, and when he saw the carts that Joseph had sent back to bring him back to Egypt, Jacob said, 'I am convinced. My son Joseph is still alive, and I will go and see him before I die.' So all of them went back to Egypt, and there was a wonderful reunion between father and son, lots of hugs and tears. And Jacob said to his son, 'Now I'm ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive.' And soon Jacob did die, and afterwards Joseph's brothers became a little nervous, saying, 'What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did against him?' So they sent a message to Joseph saying, 'Your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed against you in treating you so badly. So please forgive us.' When Joseph received this message, he wept. His brothers came before him and said, 'We are your slaves.' But Joseph said, 'Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children.' And he did. And the children of Jacob, also called Israel, grew into a great nation." Wow, that was a pretty incredible story, huh? Joseph's forgiveness of his brothers is so powerful. Joseph saw clearly that God had been working this whole time. even through his being sold into slavery or being thrown in prison. God used all of that to save the lives of countless people, including his own special people, the family of Jacob. Thank you for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this story, and this is only one of the many incredible stories in the Bible, so you should definitely check them out. I'll see you guys tomorrow.